السلام علیکم. آپ سب کو ولادت امام حسن عسکری علیہ السلام مبارک ہو. ایک درود بھیج دیں محمد وعلی محمد اللہم صلی علی محمد. ناقص روی کے لیے ہے نہ افسری کے لیے، نہ خسروی کے لیے ہے نہ افسری کے لیے. ارے زبان باقی ہے بس مدح عسکری کے لیے. زبان باقی ہے بس مدح عسکری کے لیے. اور اگر نہ ملتی انہیں نور عسکری کی زکوٰۃ، ترستے چاند ستارے بھی روشنی کے لیے. اور گرایا آپ کا روضہ جنہوں نے مولا شکار پہلا بنیں گے وہ آخری کے لیے. شکار پہلا بنیں گے وہ آخری کے لیے. اور امام پھر سے بلائیں مجھے بھی سامرا، ترس رہی ہے جبیں کب سے بندگی کے لیے. اور میرے امام کا ہمسر وہ کیسے لاتے بھلا، ملا نہ جب کوئی قمبر کی ہمسری کے لیے. اور یہ بولے دار پہ میسام میں کیسے رک جاؤں، زبان دی ہے مجھے جب علی علی کے لیے. ارے زبان دی ہے مجھے جب علی علی کے لیے. اور علی کو دیکھ کے بالی پہ میں پکاروں گا، ہے میری موت ٹھہر جا تو دو گھڑی کے لیے. اور مجھے ہے فخر کہ میں ان کی در کا نوکر ہوں. فرشتے خود جہاتے ہیں نوکری کے لیے. ارے فرشتے خود جہاتے ہیں نوکری کے لیے. اور اب اس سے بڑھ کے شرف آدمی کا کیا ہوگا، اب اس سے بڑھ کے شرف آدمی کا کیا ہوگا. رکی ہوئی ہے قیامت ایک آدمی کے لیے. अरे जुबान बाकी है बस मद है अस्करी के लिए दुरूद भेज दे मोहम्मद व आले मोहम्मद अल्लाहुम्मा सल्ली अला मुहम्मद।
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع ذنوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا أبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم، وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين، واللعنة الدائم على أعدائهم أجمعين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله الحكيم في محكم كتابه الكريم: أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم: والذين يؤذون المؤمنين والمؤمنات بغير ما اكتسبوا فقد احتملوا بهتانا وإثما مبينا. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوات اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. For the hastening, for the love of our beloved Prophet and his beloved progeny, please recite a second loud salawat. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. For the hastening in the return of our beloved 12th Imam, a third final loud salawat. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. Before I start with tonight's topic, inshallah, I want to take a moment to congratulate all brothers and sisters and the Muslim Ummah, and first and foremost the Imam of our time, on the birth of our beloved 11th Imam, Imam Hasan al-Askari, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farajahum. Tonight the topic that we'll be discussing is the topic of family gatherings and the elements that can take these family gatherings from being a holy place, from being a divine gathering, from being a gathering in which the people taking part in it will be rewarded for taking part in it, taking it from that and turning it into a toxic family gathering, God forbid. And this is a concept and an issue that all of our Imams here and there have touched on, and even in particular Imam Hasan al-Askari in some of his ahadith, he has touched on as well. The idea and the concept of family gatherings is something that you find in different cultures. In many of the cultures that you find in the East, this is a concept that is very, very deeply rooted. Regardless of where you come from in the East or where your family comes from in the East, you will find that this idea and this concept is deeply rooted within the culture. The idea of visiting relatives, the idea of staying in touch with them, the idea of returning back to your roots and the importance and the significance that this carries. And even in the Western world, you will see that this is also important, though it might be emphasized to a lesser degree, but the concept is still there, and you will find that it is still a concept that comes up in our day-to-day life and in the culture in which us and our children are spending their time. Of course, someone might ask that this year we may not be able to have these family gatherings, and so why are we even discussing this topic? And the answer to this question is, yes, we may not be able to gather this year. We may not be able to have these big family gatherings like we normally do around this time of the year, just because schools might be off and there are breaks that are coming up. But the reality is that right now, because we can't be part of these family gatherings and because there is a pause on them, this in fact is the best time to take a look at them and evaluate them and understand what are the things that might go wrong in these family gatherings. When we're in our normal routine, when we are going through the basic activities that we always do and we have the gatherings that we always do, it's difficult to pause and take a look at them and examine them and evaluate them and see whether they match with Islamic guidelines or not. So in fact, right now is maybe the best time to take a pause and realize whether these family gatherings, are we doing them the way Islam wants us to do them, or God forbid, are we doing it a different way? When it comes to Islam, Islam doesn't see family gatherings just as a means of socializing. Islam doesn't see family gatherings as a place where, for example, you just simply go and catch up with your relatives. You might see a person that you haven't seen in a long time. This is the basic function of a family gathering from the Islamic perspective. From the Islamic perspective, a family gathering plays a bigger role. And that bigger role is that it is a place of support. It is a place of healing for the relatives. When these relatives are living their lives normally, they're dealing with strangers. They're dealing with people who are not necessarily connected to them in one way or another. But when they come into a family gathering, the idea and the concept ideally is that they are now interacting and spending time with other individuals who are there to support them. And this is why Ali ibn Abi Talib, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, on his way back from the Battle of Siffin, he has this famous letter that he wrote to his son, Imam Hasan al-Mujtaba, that some refer to as his will. And in this, he starts to explain to Imam Hasan al-Mujtaba that you should try as much as you can to maintain these relationships that you have amongst your family members. And he speaks of it in this manner. He says this. He says, "Akrim ashiratak," honor your relatives, honor your tribe, honor your group of people. فَإِنَّهُمْ جَنَاحُكَ الَّذِي بِهِ تَطِيرُ, because they will be the wings that will help you fly. وَأَصْلُكَ الَّذِي إِلَيْهِ تَصِيرُ, and they are the roots to which you will return. وَيَدُكَ الَّتِي بِهِ تَصُولُ, and they are the ones that you will employ their support. You will utilize their support in order to be victorious in life, in order to be successful in life. And of course, this is coming from a man who many of his relatives, in fact, turned away from him. So it's not coming from someone who looks at the world in a very nice and dandy way, who assumes that the world has no flaws, who assumes that all of his relatives are wonderful individuals. No, it's coming from a man who many of his relatives turned away from him in reality. It's It's coming from a person who knows the practical aspect of our lives, and still he is emphasizing that it's important to try your best to maintain these relationships. Therefore, it's important for us to delve into this topic and see how we are to conduct these family gatherings from the Islamic perspective. And in order to do so, we'll pose the following questions and provide answers to them, inshallah. Number one, what is the importance of the support and healing that can happen in family gatherings from the Islamic perspective? Number two, how can a judgmental comment here or there in a family gathering, in a split second, change the whole dynamic of this family gathering and change the effect that this family gathering was supposed to have on those who took part in it? Number three, what has Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promised, or I should say, what has Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala threatened for the one who uses his comments to say hurtful things to another believer? What has Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in this regard? Number four, how does pointing out the flaws of my spouse, of my children, of my parents in a family gathering or in the presence of relatives make things even more difficult for me and my relationship with them? Number five, how do lavish gatherings and high standards that we have for family gatherings make it even more difficult for us to prepare for these gatherings? And number six, and the final question we'll delve into tonight, what is the duty of the one who is not the host of the family gathering, but he is the guest of the family gathering? What is the one thing that he has to make sure he does before he leaves or even after he leaves this family gathering? Tonight, inshallah, we'll take some time to delve into these questions and provide answers to them with a loud salawat ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farajahum. As we said, Islam doesn't look at family gatherings simply as a function of life. It goes beyond that. Islam looks at these family gatherings as a source of support, as a source of healing that an individual needs. And this is why we shared that Ali ibn Abi Talib tells his son to try to maintain these relationships as much as he can. Beyond that, you find many other ahadith from the Ahlul Bayt emphasizing this issue. And we said these ahadith are not coming from individuals who have never dealt with relatives who have not treated them fairly. This is the Ahlul Bayt. This is the Prophet. This is Ali ibn Abi Talib. Many of their relatives turned away from them. But when you look at history, you find that much of the support that they did receive, in fact, much of it sometimes came from their own relatives. You find this in the life of Ali ibn Abi Talib. You find this in the life of the Prophet as well. Some of the relatives of the Prophet turned away from him. Some of the relatives of the Prophet, in fact, became some of his greatest supporters. And amongst the greatest of them was no one but Abu Talib himself. Abu Talib was one who supported the Prophet before he even had a group of followers around him. Hamza, the uncle of the Prophet, was another who, when the likes of Abu Lahab and Abu Jahl, they used to disrespect the Prophet, they used to humiliate the Prophet or tried to do that, you find that Hamza was there to protect the Prophet. So Ali ibn Abi Talib, when he speaks about trying to maintain these relationships, this is not coming from a man who has not lived in the real world, has not gotten a taste of what it feels like when your relatives turn away from you. No, he knows exactly what that feels like, and still he is emphasizing this. And we read in his seerah on one of his trips when he was going for the battle of Jamal. And you know that the period of the Khilafah of Ali ibn Abi Talib, if you look at it from a political perspective, it was one of the most tumultuous periods of Khilafah when you look at the other Khulafa who were there. 4 years roughly and 3 battles, all 3 of these battles with individuals who claimed to have been Muslims. All 3 of these groups were saying, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. So if this was the situation, and now Ali ibn Abi Talib is on his way to Basra. On his way to Basra, the story says that he stopped in an area called Rabada, and a man approached him, said, Ya Ali, I have a problem. I have an issue that I'm dealing with. What is it? He said, my relatives, they don't support me. They don't honor me. They don't respect me. They're not there for me. Can you come and speak to them? Now bear in mind, this is Ali ibn Abi Talib on his way to a battlefield. This is not Ali ibn Abi Talib just sitting in his house, not having anything better to do. No, he has many things to take care of. He came to Ali ibn Abi Talib, he said, my relatives, they don't support me. The hadith says that Ali ibn Abi Talib asked him, he said, where are they? Can I speak to them? And he said, yes, some of them are over there. And the hadith says that Ali ibn Abi Talib then, he moved his camel. And this camel started to move, and he moved with speed, and his companions followed him. And he came upon these relatives of his. He said, what's going on? And the hadith says, they complained about this man, and this man complained about them. And beautifully, Ali ibn Abi Talib, he looks at this situation, and you can tell he's trying to explain that at the end of the day, if you support one another, it will be better for both sides. He's not going to be able to solve the situation that they have, but he just makes it clear that, listen, if you have each other's backs, not only will you be successful in this world, in the next world, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward you too. He said, listen, the group of relatives who support one another, they honor one another, they are ma'jurun. Because when you fall, the first group of people who are supposed to be there to support you, and the most likely group of people who will be there to support you are your relatives. Yes, friends will be there to support you too, but the likeliest group is going to be your relatives. And he said, if this man falls one day, you are responsible to be there and support him as much as you can. And if you do this, you will be ma'jur on the day of judgment. And if you don't do this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to ask you about it. And the hadith ends there. And you can tell Ali ibn Abi Talib is making it clear that the default should be that I try my best to maintain these relationships as much as I can. Yes, it doesn't mean that I don't have the ability to manage this relationship. We talked about this in some of our previous sessions. Managing your relationships with your relatives is something completely normal and completely fine. But trying to maintain them, the duty that Islam has placed on relatives to support one another is a very serious one, and it's a very critical one. Moving on from this, we also understand that there are great rewards for this as well. This is why Islam has emphasized the idea of Silatul Rahim, which we talked about before. And then beyond that, this is also why Islam has given us so many teachings as it relates to when a family gathering is actually going to happen. The details, you have teachings that have to do with the smallest things that are going to happen in this family gathering to the bigger things that are going to happen in this family gathering. The smaller things, when I enter, how do I give salam? Do I enter and I just say, Salaam alaikum, I just murmur something and move on? Or do I do ifsha us salam? I give salam in a way that others can hear me. When I shake hands, for example, do I shake hands and just try to move on with life? Or do I do it like the Prophet, who Imam al-Sadiq says about him that he never shook hands with anyone, except that he was the last to pull his hand back? All of these details. When you come and you want to sit in this family gathering, how do you come and sit in this family gathering? Do you just put your head down and choose the best spot, or do you sit at the first available spot? Then when you do sit and a relative now is going to walk in and he doesn't have a spot to sit in, then the Quran says, وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَكُمْ تَفَسَّحُوا, when it's told to you to make room for others, فَافْسَحُوا, make room for others, يَفْسَحِ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make room for you too. See, all of these details, Islam is teaching us about how we are supposed to approach this issue of when we get together. These are rulings that have to do with guests in general, and also in particular as it relates to family gatherings. From the smallest things, Islam has teachings when it comes to these gatherings. Then it comes to the bigger issues as well. These bigger issues are important. Why? Because sometimes if I don't pay attention to how this family gathering can go from being a healthy gathering, from being a divine gathering, a gathering that the malaika reward those who are taking part in it, if I don't pay attention to certain elements, this same gathering can then turn into a means of punishment for certain individuals who are taking part in that gathering. And this is what we understand from Islam. Sometimes you're in a situation, you're in a gathering, you're in a position, in an environment. Nothing necessarily changes around you. But initially the environment was essentially approved by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But then in a couple of seconds, you do something, the same environment, you're still sitting there, the same individuals are sitting there as well. This environment then turns into an environment where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, God forbid, looks at me and says, this one has to be punished because of what he's doing. That's possible. The Prophet is narrated to have said that when a person comes and sits in the masjid and he is awaiting the time of prayer, 5 minutes, 10 minutes before the salat starts, he's sitting there in the masjid and he's waiting. The Prophet said, every moment that he sits there in the masjid, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rewards him for that because he's waiting for salat. And then he said, مَا لَمْ يُحْدِث, unless he does one thing, unless he does this particular thing. And the companions looked at the Prophet, they said, what do you mean? وَمَا الْحَدَث, what is this thing that he does that now changes the dynamic of the position in which he's in? The Prophet said, قَالَ الْإِغْتِيَابِ. While he's sitting there and he's waiting for prayer to start, if he just sits there and turns to the one beside him and he says, what, Fulani, I heard this about him and they told me that this is what is happening to him. And this is a flaw that's hidden to others and now he's sharing it with others. The Prophet said, then the dynamics of the position that he was sitting in, the situation that he was in, now it goes from being a divine gathering to now being a gathering that he might be punished for. What changed around him? Nothing. He's still waiting for salat, still sitting in the same place. He just opened his mouth and said certain things, and now all of a sudden the malaika look at him in a different light. Similarly, when I'm sitting in a family gathering, this family gathering, if it's a healthy one, there is no doubt that I can be rewarded. If I have the right intentions, I can be rewarded for being in this family gathering. But then if certain elements take place, if certain things take place, then though the family gathering doesn't seem to change much, the same people sitting there still, then this family gathering can now become a position of sin. It can become a position where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala looks upon some of those who are in this gathering and say, what, because what he did, he is to be punished because of what he did, instead of being rewarded for taking part in this family gathering. And these are the elements that we have to pay attention to. And we'll start from here, inshallah. The first of these elements that, God forbid, happens in a family gathering, and it takes this family gathering from being healthy and it turns it into something that is toxic, are judgmental comments, hurtful comments. And unfortunately, this is something that you find is very prevalent in our family gatherings. Unfortunately, it is something that has become very common. Sometimes it has even become normal in our family gatherings. And these comments, these hurtful comments, they come in all forms and shapes. These judgmental comments, they come in all forms and shapes. Sometimes, and before I go into explaining these one by one or some of the examples, I want to say this, brothers and sisters. These types of comments, sometimes they come from the youngsters or the youth towards the elders. Sometimes it comes from the elders towards the youth. It can go from man to woman, woman to man. It can go any which way you can possibly think about it. There's a multitude of ways that this can happen. But in this family gathering, many times you will find that very hurtful comments are made. Sometimes, for example, about the appearance of one of the relatives. This is not nice. This is a very dangerous thing, and I'm going to talk about that in just a second. The appearance of an individual. Oh, well, you look different. You've gained weight since the last time we saw you. And now this person feels embarrassed and this person feels humiliated and their night is ruined. Okay. Now, of course, every situation is different. Sometimes you say this with someone that you have a very close relationship with. You're just joking with them. They joke back with you. It's completely fine. That's a separate thing. We're talking about situations where you know this person is going to feel embarrassed when you speak of this. Sometimes it has to do with their appearance. Sometimes it's not even their appearance. It has to do with their kids. That yes, your child does this. Other children, they don't do this. But your child is like this or like that. Then sometimes you find, brothers and sisters, and this is something that happens in our communities, even in our majalis, unfortunately, at times, where a young couple, maybe they come in, they have children with them, And this child is a child. This child is going to make some noise. They might cry. They might be frustrated at times. It's a child. That's why we use this terminology for them. And sometimes when they're attending a gathering, then this child starts to act out a little bit. Then all of a sudden people look at this young couple, mother, father, sometimes it can go either way, that yes, as if to say, why is your child a child? Well, because this is not a child. This is not an adult we're dealing with. This is a child that we're dealing with. Sometimes it happens in our own majalis even where, a child making noise and then all of a sudden the looks that the mother gets. Yes, when a child comes, of course, the mother and father of a young child, they have to make an extra effort. If this child is bothering other people, if this child is, disturbing the majlis, if this child is even at the family gathering, destroying the house or becoming trouble for the other guests, yes, of course, the young couple, they have to try their best to direct their child in the right way and to stop the child from doing these things. That's also a very valid point. But at a minimal level, the moment this child starts to act out a little bit, then all of a sudden people start looking at this person as if they don't know how to raise children. This is not the way of the Ahlul Bayt, brothers and sisters. Then sometimes these comments come about the relationship that the spouses have with one another. You're sitting there and then this one says, you know what? Fulani's husband does this for her. Your husband doesn't do this for you? Fulani's wife does this for him. Your wife doesn't do this for you? And now this person is embarrassed in front of so many other people. He feels or she feels embarrassed. He feels like she or he doesn't even belong to be sitting in that gathering. The problem with these types of comments, brothers and sisters, is that God forbid, if it's done on purpose, sometimes it's not done on purpose. Sometimes you say something, you didn't think it would be hurtful for this person. Later on you find out that was the case. Well, you apologize and you move on. But if I knowingly do this, if I on purpose know that I say this and it's going to hurt this person, I know this and I'm saying it because I know it's going to embarrass this person, then, brothers and sisters, this is dangerous on a whole new level. Whether it's an old person doing this, an elder person doing this, younger, doesn't matter. It can go any which way. If I sit there and I know that this comment of mine is going to make this person feel embarrassed in front of others, it's a hurtful comment that I'm going to make, or I know that it's going to break their hearts. If I do this, brothers and sisters, I'm now playing with fire, literally. Because there are many things that we can talk about as it relates to the religion of Islam, and there are many things that we learn from Quran and Hadith. There is one thing we know for sure. There's one thing that I can tell you beyond the shadow of a doubt. And that is this: young or old, doesn't matter. If I say a hurtful comment to someone else, knowing that it's going to hurt them, now I am, creating a problem with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself. You see, when you disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when I disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is Arhamur Rahimi. He is, as we read in Joshan Kabir, Haliman la ya'ajal. He is patient when someone disobeys him, when someone, God forbid, disrespects him. He is patient. He gives him another chance and another chance and another chance. This is when you are disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself. But when you start to now be hurtful towards the servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or if I start to do that, God forbid, this is now I'm playing with fire. This is no joke anymore. This is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes it very, very seriously. When you look in our ahadith, if there was any way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to threaten us when it came to disrespecting or humiliating or embarrassing another servant, you find that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has used the harshest of terms. Imagine if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to threaten me, that you know what, if you say this to my servant, this hurtful comment, knowingly, on purpose you say it. If there was any way that he wanted to threaten me, what is the most threatening, what is the harshest term or vocabulary or wording that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could possibly use? Would he say, you're no longer my friend? Would he say, you are far away from my rahmah? Would he say, what would he say? Would he say that you are now my enemy? Because this last one is exactly what the ahadith tell us. The ahadith tell us, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, He says, when there is a person who on purpose disrespects or annoys or bothers another believer, a friend of mine, فَقَدْ بَارَزَنِي بِالْحَرْبِ, he is challenging me to war now. This is different when you disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's one thing. He's haliman la ya'jal. But now when you come and you now start to be hurtful to His servants, this becomes very dangerous now. Then the hadith says that the Prophet sallallahu wasallam alayhi, based on one of the ahadith, and there are multiple ahadith that have narrated this meaning. The meaning is there in our ahadith. But this particular hadith has to do with Mi'raj, that the Prophet was on his way ascending towards the skies and he spoke to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He said, "Ma halul mu'mini indak?" He said, Ya Allah, what do you say about your believers, those who believe in you? What do you say about them? How do you think about them? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responded. He said, Man ahana li waliyan, whoever disrespects a friend of mine, faqad barazani bil harb, he has now challenged me to war. What does that mean? That means this person is now amongst my enemies. He's no longer amongst my friends. He's no longer simply away from my rahmah. No, he's amongst my enemies now. If I sit there and I say hurtful comments, then this is something that's going to be very, very serious now. This is something to really be worried about, brothers and sisters. Recite a salawat, please. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ala Muhammad wa ajil farajahum. Moving on from this, another issue that you find many times is the idea of bringing up the flaws of a child, a spouse, or even a parent in the presence of relatives. This is the second issue that can take this family gathering from this beautiful environment that it has and turns it into a toxic family gathering. Because if my spouse has 1,000 issues, if your spouse has 1,000 issues, if my child has 1,000 issues, if my father or mother have 1,000 of issues, and I'm saying all of these examples because this can go any which way you can possibly think of. It happens in a multitude of ways. If they have 1,000 issues, all 1,000 of them have to be dealt with in the privacy of your house. They all have to be dealt with outside of this family gathering. Not one of them is going to be solved in this family gathering. It never helps to bring up the issue in the family gathering, because now this person is even more embarrassed. Now this person is even less likely to cooperate with you at this point. This is another issue. And sometimes you have this with parents and children. Sometimes you have this with children and parents. And again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes this very seriously, because how many times have you and I disobeyed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And the hundreds of times that you and I have disobeyed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not once did He go out to other people and tell them, listen, this is what this guy is doing. The hadith says that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala were to ever open up to other servants what this servant or that servant does, that they will not, some of them will not bury each other. Meaning what? Meaning that if they realize the flaws that they have, if they realize the mistakes that they make, that they won't even want to be around one another. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He hides these. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that as long as it has to do with you and me, this is between you and me, I'm not going to share it with anybody else. And then you and I, we sit in this family gathering and we bring up this issue in front of uncles and cousins and children and relatives and grandmothers and grandfathers and all sorts of individuals, and we assume that this might help the situation. No, this is going to make the situation even worse. You might say, well, my child, my father, my mother, my sibling, my cousin, whatever the case may be, they have something that they have to work on. I have to tell them something is bothering me. No problem. You have to pull this person aside and speak to them privately. That's why Imam Hasan al-Askari, who we are commemorating his birth on a night like this, he says, Man wa'ada akhahu sirran, whoever tells his brother or sister, whoever gives advice to his brother or sister privately, faqad zanahu. He has adorned him. He's made him look nice. And then he says, the one who does it publicly, فَقَدْ شَانَهُ. He's embarrassed him. He has now made him look bad in the presence of others. Yes, there are many things that you might have to tell your child over and over and over and over again until maybe after 10 years, they start to do it. But this is the patience that comes with raising children. Nobody is saying raising children is easy. It's a very difficult thing to do. If anyone ever said raising children is easy, it's because they didn't have children of their own. It's not an easy thing to do. It's very challenging. But then you find the seerah of the Ahlul Bayt is that as much as they found these issues, they used to be patient. And if they are going to bring it up, they're not going to bring it up in front of others. If I could count myself, how many times I've been in the presence of a family where family issues are now coming up in the presence of me, who's not even related to this family. I'm a stranger to this family. Of course, we're, brothers and sisters in faith, but outside of that, in terms of relationships, family relationships and ties, I'm a stranger. And yet these issues are coming up, and parents with children, children with parents, they're discussing this in the presence of a stranger, someone who's not part of the family. This is a problem. You find with Nuh alayhi salam, the patience of Nuh was something special, the patience of this Prophet of Allah. And we can't aim for something like that, but if we can just learn at least a little bit from it, or try to learn at least a little bit from it. Nuh, his son, did things that probably none of our children will ever do. His son was on the wrong path until the last moment. But when you look at the verses of the Quran, you find even in the last moments, Nuh is still speaking kindly to his child. This is why Nuh is a prophet. Because even in those last moments, the Quran starts to describe that now we had this ship of Nuh, we started to have it move. وَقَالَ ارْكَبُوا فِيهَا بِسْمِ اللَّهِ مَجْرَاهَا وَمُرْسَاهَا Inna Rabbi la ghafurur rahim. Now, Bismillah, this ship is now moving. Whoever's on it is on it. Whoever's not on it is not on. These are the final moments now. And Nuh, as the story says, and the Quran clearly says, he saw his son. And when he sees his son in those moments, he doesn't turn to his son and say, "What are you doing? Get on this ship. What are you thinking?" Of course, he doesn't approve of what's happening. But take a look at what Nuh said in those final moments. وَهِيَ تَجْرِي بِهِمْ فِي مَوْجٍ كَالْجِبَالِ. And these waves were coming, and these waves were so great, they were like mountains. وَنَادَى نُوحٌ ابْنَهُ. And Nuh called his son. These are the final sentences that are going to be exchanged between Nuh and his son. But pay attention to what Nuh says. How does he address his son in these final moments? Look at the patience of this prophet. وَنَادَى نُوحٌ ابْنَهُ وَكَانَ فِي مَعْزِلٍ. And his son was isolated, and now the waves are coming from him. Ya bunayya. Bunay in Arabic means my dear son. These are the final moments, and still Nuh refers to his son as what? My dear son. Irkab ma'ana. Come and be on this ship with us. If it was us, we would have lost our patience a long time ago. Yes, raising children is not an easy thing. It's a very difficult thing. This is why it has so much reward in our hadith. But the reality is that bringing up issues in the presence of relatives, this is not going to help anything. This is going to make things even worse. This is the second element that we have to pay attention to. Sometimes it can go not just with parents with children. Sometimes children will bring this up in the presence of others as it relates to their parents. Both of them is wrong. Recite a salawat, please. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ala Muhammad wa ajil farajahum. Moving on to the third element, and this topic, of course, is a two-part topic. We won't be able to discuss all of the issues today. Inshallah, the next topic, we'll discuss some of the other ones as well. The third thing that takes a family gathering from it being healthy, from it being a source of relaxing, from it being a source of stress relief, and turns it now into a sense or a source of anxiety and stress, is when this gathering now turns into a lavish gathering. Meaning that the standards that we set for this gathering are so high that because you and I are trying to meet those standards, now this family gathering that was supposed to be a time where we get together and we relax and we connect with one another now becomes an issue of a stress. Now, a week before the relatives arrive, we have to do a whole revolution has to happen inside of the house. There's a code red inside of the house. Why? Because a week from now, we're going to have relatives coming over. And because of that, now the standards that we have set for ourselves are so high that now this puts extra pressure on the family. Sometimes these high standards will come because a person feels like they want to provide for their guests, which we will talk about in just a moment, is a wonderful thing. And sometimes it will come from external factors. Sometimes it comes from a little bit of competition. Sometimes it comes from the fact that I'm thinking, you know what, Fulani in our relatives had this type of a gathering at their house. Well, mine has to be even better. And the other one is thinking, well, mine has to be even more lavish, has to be even better. And all of this now puts stress on everyone who's involved. This is the wrong way of looking at things. When guests are coming over, when you look at the ahadith of the Ahlul Bayt, there are two principles that we understand in this regard. Two principles. And there are many teachings that Ahlul Bayt have as it relates to guests, but two of them are the most key and the most fundamental as it relates to the discussion we're having. Number one, that when your guest is coming over, you're supposed to try to do your best to honor them. You are supposed to make an effort. You are supposed to try to make them feel honored and respected and special. And the Prophet has said that the one who believes in Allah and the Day of Judgment, he will honor his guests. Meaning that when the guests come over, he does his best to honor them. And in other ahadith, we also find this, that when people wanted to come, the Ahlul Bayt were very careful about their guests and honoring their guests and making their guests feel special. In some ahadith, it says that when your guests are coming, help them when they're coming in. When they're leaving, don't help them so that they can leave. This doesn't mean don't help them. It's trying to say something else, something hidden in the meaning of this hadith, meaning that you show that you would rather have them stay. You're leaning towards having them stay. And in the other ahadith, companion of Imam al-Sadiq, he says that I was in the house of the sixth Imam. A guest of his came over, and his guest got up to get something, and the sixth Imam asked him to sit down. He said, the Prophet has taught us that when the guest comes over to our house, we don't want the guest to be doing work in the house. Now, this doesn't mean you sit there and you fight with your guests for 2 hours because they might want to help a little bit here and there. No, all of this shows that generally Islam wants us to honor our guests. Generally, Islam wants us to make an effort. Your appearance, the appearance of your house. If the Prophet was leaving the house to meet people, he would look upon water and he would use it as a mirror in order to fix his appearance. So if someone's coming over as a guest, there's no doubt that I should try to make an effort. I should try to make them feel special. This is a principle that we understand, no doubt about it. The second principle that we also understand from the same body of ahadith is that as much as I should try to make my guests feel honored, I am not supposed to pressure myself too much. I am not supposed to make it such that I exert so much pressure on myself, so much pressure on my spouse, on my children, that now the whole issue in the house for the next 2 weeks becomes this gathering that we are going to have. Well, this puts pressure on the household. And this can happen with man or woman. It's not a gender thing we're discussing here. This is a general thing. It has to do with families. That I now pressure myself. The Prophet have said that when you have guests over, لا يتكفلن يتكلفن. Do not place kulfat upon yourself. لا يتكلفن أحد لضيقه ما لا يقدر. Provide what you can. And providing what you can means from a financial perspective, you provide what you can. It also means from a time perspective, you provide what you can. Yes, you make an effort. Yes, you try to make the house look clean. Of course, these are all part of manners. But then I kill myself and I put so much pressure on myself, my husband or wife, doesn't matter, my children, that yes, because now we have relatives, now like everything has to be canceled because of the relative. This was not the seerah of the Ahlul Bayt. If someone wants to, really make their guests feel special, that's fine. But to put so much pressure on themselves and their relatives, this is not something that we find in the seerah of the Ahlul Bayt. Yes, making an effort is definitely important. Imam al-Sadiq is narrated to have said very beautifully. He says, "Al-mu'minu la yahtashimu min akhih." He says, a believing man or a believing woman, he does not place what we refer to normally as takalluf between himself and his brother or sister. What does that mean? That means that, of course, you have this takalluf at a minimal level. It's a part of manners. You offer things. There's no doubt about that. But then you make it such that as if a stranger is coming, as if there is somebody who you have to now change your whole lifestyle because this person is coming. The Imam says this is not how believers go about it. And then he says this, he says, "La adri wa ma udri ayyuhuma a'jab." I don't know which one is more interesting or is more intriguing. Which one of these two? الذي يكلف أخاه إذا دخل عليه أن يتكلف له. The one who pressures his host to do a lot for him, or the one who, when he is the host, pressures himself to do a lot for the guests. By a lot, I don't mean making an effort. That's important. By a lot, we mean pressuring yourself so much, placing so much pressure and anxiety on yourself that now it even affects your relationship with your wife or husband. It affects your relationship with your children. It affects your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself. This was not part of the seerah of the Ahlul Bayt. And as we'll share in some of the other hadith, when Ali ibn Abi Talib was invited to go to the house of another believer, he would make conditions to one of them. He said, I have 3 conditions. And amongst those conditions was the fact that you do not put yourself through immense pressure just because I'm coming over. And we'll discuss that in just a second. The first point that we have to understand is that we have to lower our standards of these gatherings. Doesn't mean we don't make an effort. No, there are many things a host can do. Some of them we'll discuss in the part 2 of this session, of what a host can do to make his guests feel welcome. This is very important. We have many teachings from the Ahlul Bayt as it relates to this. But now pressuring myself so much, this was not part of the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt. This is number 1. The second issue that we have to pay attention to is that when we have these family gatherings, they don't just happen with a snap of fingers. There are those who work hard and exert time and energy to make this family gathering become what it has become. And many times in the cultures that we come, usually the brunt of this and the most responsibility of this falls on the mother of the household. Now, before I continue with this, as a separate point, we do have to mention this, that this is not to say that fathers are not to be appreciated. No, many of our fathers, they work so hard. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless them for their hard work. There's no doubt about it. Many of our fathers work long hours, especially with the economy that we have now and the difficulties that we're going through now. If a father has been able to provide, then his work should be appreciated even more. There's no doubt about that. If he's not able to provide, then that means you have to be extra kind now because he's under pressure himself now that he can't provide. The hard work that our fathers do has to be appreciated, so there's no doubt about that. That's, of course, the topic of a separate discussion. But as it relates to this particular issue, when it comes to family gatherings, usually the brunt of the responsibility is the mother bears it. The mother has to go through this issue. And this is also something that we don't find in the seerah of the Ahlul Bayt. That if we are going to have a gathering, only the mother has to worry about it. None of us has to worry about it. And the idea is that everyone now has to come together and contribute. Yes, sometimes a father, maybe, he's working long hours, he's not able to contribute himself, at least building a culture in the household so that the children understand that the children are also supposed to come. And if he can come himself and help, then he should do that. And if he can't, at least building a culture where the children understand this as well. And when you look at the seerah of our ulama, when you look at the seerah of our scholars, there is none of them who is a great scholar unless that you will find his wife will tell you that whenever we wanted to get work done in the household, if he wasn't busy, he was helping me. You won't find a great scholar that his wife will not say that about him. You won't come across it. The wife of Allama Tabatabai says this. The wife of Imam Khomeini says this. Ayatollah Bahjat, we have sayings about this. Other scholars, Shahid Mutahari, we have sayings about this. Many of them in detail. Imam Khomeini in particular was one that was very, very sensitive about this issue. That his daughter says that whenever we were in the house and my mother was working in the kitchen, he says, first of all, he would go and help, and if he would see that the children are sitting while the parents are working, that was not, especially the mother, that was not okay with Imam Khomeini. He would tell us to get up and help. Building this culture is very important. That if we're going to have a family gathering, this is not just the responsibility of a mother. It's not just the responsibility of the woman in the household. No, everyone has to try to contribute as much as they can. And of course, our fathers, they work hard as well. There's no doubt about that. But as much as they can, we all have to come together to be able to contribute. And if I understand this now, and you look at the seerah of the Ahlul Bayt, you see this. Ali ibn Abi Talib, when he was invited to come and be a part of the gathering in the house of one of his friends, he made 3 conditions. He said, I'll come with these 3 conditions. What are these 3 conditions? He said, number 1, that when I come for this gathering, that if you have anything in your house, you don't withhold it from me, meaning that you make an effort to make me feel special. Of course, these are not his own conditions. He's trying to teach us things here, right? He said, when I come, that you don't hold back anything that you already have in your house. That's number 1. Number 2 is that you won't try to go out of your way too much to go and buy other things just because I'm coming. You won't pressure yourself just because I'm coming. This is my condition before I come to your house. And number 3, وَلَا تُجْحِفْ عَلَى الْعِيَالِ, in that you don't pressure your family because I'm going to be coming. So you have to try to lift the burden. We all have to try to do this. And beyond this, and this will be the final point that I will make in this regard, and we will move on, brothers and sisters, that if it's a situation where the mother is working, the father is working, the child, whoever is contributing, some of them more, some of them less, whoever is contributing, it is very important, brothers and sisters, to make them feel appreciated. If they don't feel appreciated, then the others have not done their duty. If they don't feel appreciated for this work that they're putting in, then they weren't obligated to have this family gathering. It's not like it was wajib on them. They're doing it out of the kindness of their hearts. They're doing it because they love their families. Man or woman, doesn't make a difference. Whoever contributes, yes? They're doing it out of the... So if this person is contributing, then you and I have a duty to make sure that they feel appreciated. And this idea is one of the duties of the guests. The host has the duty to make the guest feel special as much as he can, and the guest has the duty to make sure that when this family gathering is put together, and this person has spent hours on their feet cooking and cleaning and preparing this gathering, that they feel appreciated. And it's not difficult. It just takes some awareness. Sometimes a couple of comments here or there. Oh, this food, it looks so wonderful. This is so delicious. Thank you so much. I haven't had these in a long time. These comments, brothers and sisters, making the other person feel appreciated is very important. And the Prophet is narrated to have said, he said, may Allah curse those who stop the path of good. May Allah curse those who stop goodness from happening. And the companions were confused. They said, Ya Rasulullah, what do you mean, those who stop good from happening? He said, you know who they are? They are the ones that when good is done to them, when someone does something good for them, they don't thank this person, and because this person doesn't feel appreciated, this person no longer does this anymore. He said, these are the ones who stop the path towards goodness because that person no longer feels appreciated. Appreciating the work of another person. And this goes for any member of the family. But because we're discussing family gatherings, as I said, this usually falls on the mothers as it relates to the mothers, especially with this pandemic that we're going through. With children now staying in the house and now having to keep them busy, and with the online education that we have, this is even more critical in this time. And of course the appreciation of our fathers as well. This one does not deny or take the place of the other one at all. The Prophet said, and I'll mention this as the last point, he said, the one who does good to others and does not feel appreciated, and many of us might find ourselves in this position at one time or another, he said, "La yazhadanna," do not hold back from your good anymore because people did not appreciate the good that you did to them. Why? Beautifully, the hadith says. He says, because the one who didn't benefit, the one who never even received the good that you did, the one who did not even benefit from the good you did will thank you more than those who attended will thank you. It says, don't let it become an obstacle for you being kind-hearted when others may not appreciate you, because the one who never even was part of this gathering, the one who didn't even benefit from the good that you did, meaning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He will thank you more than these people will thank you. This is a principle in life, that if I do good upon people and a certain group of them may not thank me, they may not appreciate me, we all come across situations like this. This is not supposed to now change me. This is not supposed to make me into a different person. Yes, maybe I have to communicate with them. Maybe I have to speak to them about it, especially within spouses. Of course, they have to communicate with one another. But in the reality of life, if someone doesn't appreciate what I did for them, this shouldn't change me. This should change maybe the way I look at that individual, the understanding I have of that individual, but it should not change my characteristics and my kindness. This will bring the talk to an end here, inshallah. In the second part of this, we'll talk about some of the other issues that come up in these gatherings. Sometimes it's backbiting, God forbid, that happens. Sometimes the jokes and the sarcasm that people use. Sometimes we sit there and say, you know what? If you can get married, then anyone can get married. We have to be careful about these comments. Sarcasm that we use, making everyone in the gathering feel welcome. Sometimes you'll have a gathering where some people are sitting and talking for hours, and this person is sitting over there in the corner and nobody is talking to them. These are some of the issues that, inshallah, we'll discuss in part 2 of this topic. With that, inshallah, I'll bring tonight's talk to an end. Let's take a moment to recite Surah Fatiha for all of our marhumin and marhumat with a loud salawat ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farajahum. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Maliki yawmiddin. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين.
السلام عليك يا رسول الله، السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين، السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء يا سيدة النساء العالمين، السلام عليك يا أبا محمد يا حسن بن علي المجتبى، السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك، عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار، ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. السلام عليك يا قمر بني هاشم يا أبو الفضل العباس بن أمير المؤمنين، السلام عليك يا أم المصائب يا زينب بنت أمير المؤمنين، السلام عليكم يا شهداء كربلاء جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا غريب الغرباء، يا معين الضعفاء والفقراء، يا علي بن موسى رضا راضي بالقدر والقضاء. السلام عليك يا صاحب العصر والزمان. الأمان 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 من فتنة الزمان. يا سيدي أجل الله تعالى فرجك وسهل الله تعالى مخرجك وزهورك. السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته.